Okay, so Yom HaAtzmaut, have we lost the plot? And the reason I called it this is because I think we have. So I'm not really asking a question. It's rhetorical. I'm saying that we have lost the plot. And I want to be able to look at why I think it is the case. And in order to do that, I mean, the first thing that I like to do is to look at some of these excerpts from the Tanakh with you. The reason I want to do this is because we forget sometimes, right? If we're looking at it as Israel from our perspective, which obviously is looking at it from a perspective of breed, taking the breed seriously, recognizing that Torah and its context is meaningful to us, I'm taking that as a given. I'm not proving that tonight, right? If that's not the given here, then you're in the wrong, discussion. That's the given. And what I've said many times, and I will remind you, for the purposes of this discussion, of this shiur, is that it is important for us to recognize that when we look at the Brit, when we look at the covenant that Kadosh Baruch Hu has with our people, that starts, of course, with the Brit Abraham Avinu. Without that Brit, there is no other Brit. I mean, every other Brit is only building upon that one. It's the Brit Abraham Avinu. And the Brit Abraham Avinu is established between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Abraham, and there's only one thing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu continues to promise Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and the reiteration of this Brit, and that is land. He promises that they will have land. There's no promise of a Torah. You would think that might be something that God might want to discuss, when it comes to Abraham, being that it's that important, right? So central to us. But it doesn't discuss that. It discusses land. There are hints here and there that there might be a Torah involved, right? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to himself, right, or to the screen, as a soliloquy, he goes, I'm not keeping for Abraham what I'm doing just before Sodom and Amorah. Yeah, he says, he's going to command him and his children, his household after him, to keep my laws. And to keep the Derech Hashem, But outside of that, there's nothing. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, when Moshe Rabbeinu was hired for one very specific purpose: get them out of this land and bring them into that land. Why? Because I promised that I'm giving them this land. So the land is everything to us, in no uncertain terms. And the problem that we have is that we tend to see the land in every other term. We see it in religious terms. We see it in political terms. We see it in vacation terms. We see it in all kinds of terms. But we do not recognize the land as absolutely fundamental to who we are as a people. Very, very rarely do we see that. Right? And I mean that even the people that are insisting on building the shtachim and saying nobody lives there and it's not a big deal and so on and so forth, it's all political. At the end of the day, they think it's religious. And even if it is religious, it's religious and political. But it's not recognizing that we as a people fundamentally just belong there. And there may be obstacles to us being able to access it, but it's where we belong. That's the most important thing. And it is the earth itself. I'm not just talking about the airspace, right? Which in itself is valuable. Hakamim say the airspace of Eretz Yisrael is mahkima. Avirat Eretz Yisrael mahkima. Just the air of Israel, right, of the land of Israel, brings wisdom to people. It helps people think. Whatever that means. I don't know what that means, but the only reason I'm referencing it is because Hakamim are talking about the Israeli airspace. And they talk about its earth and its stones. And they also talk about just the rhetoric around it. How does we speak about the land itself? What it's like to be there, what it's like to live there. And for us to lose that, to kind of lose sight of that reality, that the actual land, that the actual airspace, that the actual rocks, right, that the actual presence in that space in and of itself is the major value. And on top of that is a question of how do we govern ourselves in that land? How do we deal with the obstacles that face us in that land? How do we deal with war in that land? How do we deal with enemies in that? Yeah, that's all on top of the core aspect of what it is the land is for us. And it is essentially where we belong on this planet. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu's main goal is that this is where you belong on this planet. And it's the opening Rashi. It literally is the opening Rashi of the whole Torah, right? The very famous opening Rashi. Amar B'Yitzhak. Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu begin with Maaseh Bereshit? Koach Ma'asav Higid Le'amo. He wanted to show that it's essentially the development of his creation, right? It's his actions, it's his koach that brought all of this stuff into being in the first place. Koach Ma'asav Higid Le'amo, Latet Lahem Nahalat Goyim. And what he wanted to do was to give them the Nahalat Goyim. What's Nahalat Goyim? Nahalat Goyim is nation's inheritance. So this is a national issue, right? It's a national issue, and for us, it's a familial nation, right? It's the nation of a family. It's a nation that manifested ultimately in the propagation of a family. But that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying. The opening of Bereshit is not just to say that God is the God of creation. God is the God of creation and runs in it and appropriates land as the ultimate landlord. God presents himself, at least as far as Rashi is concerned, in the opening of the Torah, as primarily a landlord. And it's how we find HaKadosh Baruch Hu several times in Tanakh, because in the old days, that's how people used to think about polytheism, right? There was Adonai Haaretz. Who's Adonai Haaretz? Who's in charge of this particular portion of geography, right? You got to patronize, right, the appropriate God in terms of their jurisdiction. And so there's discussion later in Sefer Melachim when Bnei Israel come in, the Shomronim come in, the Shomronim say, oh, but we have to be careful, Elohei Haaretz here in Canaan, this God of Israel, and so on and so on. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a landlord, and that is, he's very happy having that role. That's one of the things that's very important for him to know, that, you know, I appropriate the land as to who it is that I see fit. And we speak about it all the time. And it's not just us, it's everybody else, right? It talks about when he took this nation off this land, brought them in because they were supposed to be there for this long. So that's how the Torah presents it. Which means that the movements on earth, right, are very God-oriented. Right? There's definitely Torah wants us to see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is interested in where it is that we are geographically. And we, I don't just mean Israel, I mean human beings. Very interested in where it is that we are geographically. And one of the reasons for that is because we are Earth. That's who we are as human beings. We are Earth. That's why we're called Adam, because we come from the Adamah. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu's major issue with Adam Rishon is just that you should know you are Earth, and you're going to go back to Earth. And I just want you to realize that you are conscious Earth. Everything above that is literally, it's just layers on top of that fundamental issue. And when we lose the fundamental, we lose everything. Because if we think that the religious issue is the primary issue, then we lose the fundamental idea. I mean, religious people have such a huge problem that completely irreligious people founded the state of Israel and cared about very little but working the land. To the point that they boycotted, right? They don't want to have anything to do with what was going on. We can't have anything to do with any of it until today, right? The Yom, even on Yom HaShoah, forget about anything having to do with Eretz Yisrael. You know, when the sirens go off, yeah, many religious people in Eretz Yisrael do not stand with everybody else in stillness during the alarms. Why? It's a Chiloni government decided that's how we're supposed to show honor. We'll sit and read Tehillim. Okay, but it also fails to recognize that there's a complete dissociation from the rest of the nation, right? That they don't wish to be able to associate with, as is manifest on the land. So these things, these layers that we have, that lie on top of the simple question of where does this cohort of conscious earth belong on this earth? And if we're looking at it from a theological perspective, which we tend to, right? That's a given in this thing. That's what Torah teaches us. So I want to read some of this bit with you. It's so important that even when HaKadosh Baruch Hu does give us the Torah, right? Ramban Nachmani, I've said also many times, Ramban Nachmani says very beautifully that the entire Torah is mitzvot etuliyot ba'aretz. That the whole of Torah are commandments meant to be performed in our homeland. The fact that we will perform them outside the homeland because they are not necessarily contingent entirely. There's some that are, but some are not. Okay, so that's part of what it is that we do as citizens of the land. But they are meant to be performed entirely now. How do you keep Shabbat in the Netherlands, in the middle of the White Nights? good luck. Go for it. You know, I don't know what you got to do. You got to find a very good posek to help you with that. But it's not where Shabbat is meant to be kept. So I want to show, right, that even after the giving of the Torah, even with the quote unquote punishments, and there are punishments in the Torah for not following Brit, right, for not keeping covenant. There's no ejecting from the covenant, but there are punishments for not keeping the covenant. And even in terms of the punishments, it's always, listen, this is going to be a penalty. There will be chastisement. There will be a serious trial by fire in order to be able to manage the fact that the Brit is intact. But it will only be a means to an end, and I will bring things to culmination and fruition. And for God, what is the bringing of things into culmination and fruition? You'll say Mashiach, maybe. I don't know if you would, but I'm saying you say it. And the reality is the Torah mentions not a word about the Mashiach. We read into that, right? Rambam's got to do a whole play on psukim all over the place to be able to kind of assert the reality of a Mashiach, psukim from Balak, and so on and so forth, and drashot that Hachamim give, and Torah makes zero mention of it. There's only one thing that the Torah says, which is the as far as the Torah is concerned, how it is that we can recognize that the promise of Hakadosh Baruch Hu to our people is manifested, and it isn't Mashiach. It's this. If you look at the first thing on the pages, this is after the Tochecha, right, of Bechukotai, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu outlines severe punishments, right, as a result of not, which also incidentally are all in there, right? Mashiach's not in the Torah, but the trials and hardships and sufferings and disasters and deaths and massacres of Israel are in the Torah. And we signed them in blood. We signed up for it from the beginning. It says after all of that, Ve'av gamzot, right? Even after all of that, right? After I've outlined for you the worst suffering and disasters of your future. When they are in the lands of their enemies, lo me'astim v'lo ge'altim lechallotam. I will not reject them to the point of annihilation. I will maintain an aspect of the people, even if it ends up driving it close to the brink of annihilation. This is what the Torah is saying, right? Lechallotam means I will not reject them to the point of annihilation, which means that up to the point of annihilation, it could get very bad. It could get very dark and very terrible. But it won't be to the point of annihilation. Lechallotam. Why? Lehafer beriti ita. I will not abrogate my covenant. I may bring the covenant until it's to its most strict readings of the fine print, but I will not ever abrogate my covenant. My covenant will stand with the people, Ki ani Adonai Elohim, because I am the Lord their God. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, it continues in Devarim. HaKadosh Hu keeps revisiting this in the Torah in various modes. Because in Devarim, there's also a mention of horrible trials and disaster. Yeah. And it says, "V'haya ki yavo alecha kol hadevarim ha'ele." Now, when all of these words that I've said to you come to you, actually pass through you, ha'beracha ve'akelala, both the blessing and the curse. Asher natati lefanecha, that I have placed before you. Your heart will begin to return in all of those places that I have scattered you, right? That I have sent you into the other nations of the world. Right? You will be living amongst the other nations of the world, not home. So notice in both of these points, how is it opening? One of the major aspects of the problem is what? One of the major aspects of the problem of the people that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is referencing that is out of place is what? They're not home. That keeps coming up. So to point out how central home is, right? Belonging is, which is essentially a statement of the people that we are on this earth. Which part of this earth is our earth? Is more than central in Torah. It is the foundational point. And the response to that is you're going to be not at home. You're going to find yourself on earth that isn't your earth. And you may do everything that you can to feel at home on the foreign soil, but it will not be Israeli soil. It will be foreign soil. And even when you are on foreign soil, I will not annihilate you there. Yes? Now, this is the one promise of the Torah that today seems completely and utterly impossible. It says that you will, in those places, on that foreign soil, come to return to me with all of your heart and all of your soul, you and your children. And I will bring you back, and I will have mercy on you. And I will gather you from all of those nations. That to which God scattered you. So that is why Yom HaAtzmaut is so exciting. Why is Yom HaAtzmaut so exciting? Because there are mentions in the Torah, and we'll see in the Nevi'im, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says you are going to be scattered on foreign soil, which that's clear. Everybody recognizes that. That's happened. There's no question about that. The fact of the matter is, as I say often, we shouldn't be here. It's crazy enough that we have managed to live on foreign soil in one way or another for close to 2,000 years. Sure, we've been driven out of here and driven out of there and burned here and burned there and killed here and massacred there. But at the end of the day, we are the wandering Jews that just don't die, which is a problem because they keep trying to kill us, but we don't die. Casualties, yeah, that's, as I said, was already outlined. But the Brit doesn't go away. Now the question is, we'll bring you back. And what we watched and what Yom HaAtzmaut celebrates is that. It's that it's another aspect of the Nebu'ah that only manifested for us 75 years ago. All of our great-grandparents were only working on the first bit, which was V'hifitzecha. I'm going to scatter you into all of the land. And everybody knew, oh, we're scattered. Nobody saw this bit. I'm going to bring you back. This is a 3,000-year-old promise. And it's only in the last 75 years that we've seen that aspect of the Nebuah manifest. So you can imagine it gets people very excited. It also makes people very nervous. It also makes people very upset. Because it highlights something that we were able to, if we wanted to, disregard for 2,000 years. And both we did and they did, right? We did more than they did. And by they, I mean the other nations in the world. Until it got to be that we were a bit too difficult to manage, or that we were starting to get a bit too prominent, or we were starting to get too strong and powerful. Then they remembered, wait a minute, they're not us. This is another nation that is visiting over here. And wherever it is that they go, the people that host them, if they're not behaving appropriately, get into big trouble. So there is a tremendous difficulty with regards to the fact that Israel is now manifest again, that it can actually, this nation that has managed to survive for this entire time can now go back home to the address that they left to begin with. Right? It's not a new house somewhere. It's not another city. That they're going back to the same old place that they left everything. They left everything there. So that is massively difficult to deal with on whatever level. The biggest difficulty is the reality of it. That is hard to accept. So, go so far as to say me, and the Chacha, I want you to know how serious this is for me, God is saying in the Psukim, right? I want you to understand, you can't get far enough. It's impossible to get too far away from home. Because you could be to literally the ends of the earth, or as he's saying, at the ends of the heavens. You'll be at the ends of the heavens. I'll bring you back from there. I hold the entire earth. From there I will take you. And the Lord your God will bring you back to the land that your forefathers inherited, and you will inherit it. I will do good for you there, and I'll make you plentiful there, more than your fathers did, more than I did for your fathers. So we see this happening, but we don't quite see it happening, because the return has begun. But there's holes in it, isn't there? Right? The teshuvah thing, that hasn't manifested. The hirbecha me'avotecha bit, better than your parents had it, or your great, well, I don't know. There were some good times. It was King Solomon and all that. So there are holes in it. I'm just going to raise that, and we'll come back to that. Again, same theme. I'm going to bring you out from the nations. I'll gather you from all of the lands. I'll bring you to your earth. Yeshaya, when God has mercy on Yaakov and chooses again Israel, he will rest them upon their earth. Even the strangers that are near them and close to them will bring them together and be part of the house of Yaakov, which is a nice idea. The Lord says, I'm zealous. I feel a strong urge for Tzion. I'm going to come back to Tzion. I'm going to live in Yerushalayim. And the city of Yerushalayim will be called the city of truth. And the mount of God will be a holy mountain. We haven't seen that yet. That hasn't manifested yet. But we come into the land, and then Yerushalayim happens, so we do have Yom Yerushalayim, which is exciting. But there are holes. So it's the holes that are important, because we tend not to pay attention to what's missing. We tend to pay attention to what it is that's there, because the missing parts make us feel very uncomfortable. We like to say that we're done and everything's great and we're all ready to go. But all we are watching, if we are watching, because it may not be this at all. I mean, it would be very easy to be able to say that this is what it is. We would hope very much. I mean, it's certainly not unintelligent to be inclined to say that this is kind of, what we're watching is what has been promised. Which is why many people leave the line Reshit Smicha Geulatenu out of the prayer for the state of Israel, which means literally Reshit Smicha means the beginning of the buddings of our redemption. Some say, well, we have no idea what this is the beginning of redemption. It may be, but we're not putting in prayer. We don't want to say things that are untrue in prayer. Make sure first. Whether it is or it isn't, there are things missing. The teshuvah is definitely missing. Absolutely. On all fronts. Everybody is still hunkering down on what they want to do. It has nothing to do with religious or non-religious. It's just everybody's doing their own thing. Nobody's opening up to see, well, what do we need to do differently in order to be able to bring things together? Very rarely is anyone seeing that. It's just insistence on we've got it, whoever it is that we might be. And that's not very conducive for Teshuvah. Because the more sure that we are to the fact that we've got it right, the less close we are to God. If we've got it right, well, then we don't really need him. Being open for him to tell us what is the right thing, and knowing that he might surprise us tremendously with what it is that he brings us to do, is a whole nother story. That's, by the way, why we fast Tzom Gedalia. One of the things that's connected to Tzom Gedalia. You know the story of Tzom Gedalia. After Gedalia dies, he's murdered. It's his post-Gedalia's murder. The people feel that they are terribly vulnerable because they're between Egypt and Babylon, and they feel like they're going to be crushed between them. Gedalia is no longer there as a governor to be able to fight and protect. So they go to Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu is the Navi. And they ask Yirmiyahu, tell us what God says we should do. And Yirmiyahu says to them, but you're not going to listen. You never do. And they said, no. This time, we will listen to God. Whatever he says, we will do it. And Yirmiyahu says, you may not like what he's going to say. I mean, are you sure that you're ready to hear what it is that he says to do? And they say, whatever he says to do, we will do. This is literally, it's in the text. So Yirmiyahu says, okay, I'll go ask him. He goes to ask God. God takes 10 days to get back to his text. He doesn't respond for 10 days. And finally, after 10 days, God says to Yirmiyahu, because they want to go down to Egypt to be protected by Egypt. So God says, tell them not to go anywhere. Tell them they shouldn't go to Egypt. Tell them stay right where they are. And if they stay where they are, I will rebuild them from their land. It's going to be dodgy for a while, right? It's going to be a little bit nervous. They're going to be a little bit nervous because it will feel very vulnerable. But tell them not to leave home. This is after the destruction of the second Bayit and all of that. He's got a vassal. Tell them to stay. I will rebuild from them. And if they do go down to Egypt, you can tell them that the swords that they are running from to take refuge in Egypt will follow them down to Egypt, and they will be cut down there. That should be done. So Yirmiyahu goes back, and he tells the people, this is what God said. And the people hear it, and they say to Yirmiyahu, Sheker ata medaber. You're a liar. God didn't say that. We're going down to Egypt. Right? Why do I say that? Because we believe that we are open to what it is that God tells us, or what it is that he's inclining us to do. But it's very rare that we actually are open to it, because it's never what we expect to be. And we, of course, expect God to be rational, like we are, and understand what it is that we think is the best thing to do. And very rarely is that the case, because as HaKadosh Baruch Hu has said to us in Navi, Lo machshavotay machshavotechem, lo darkechem derachai. My thoughts are not your thoughts, your ways are not my ways. I do things differently. And that's why you might be surprised as to the things that I tell you to do, or the things that I actually do. And that's the issue. You're not ready for God, you're ready for you. And that's been the story all across the time. All right, so that's the issue. And that's why when we have a question with regards to what is going on with Eretz Yisrael, there's really one way to deal with it, in my humble opinion. And that is, grab your popcorn and watch. And look, it's what Mordechai taught us. That's one of the reasons why Purim is so important, because what Mordechai teaches us is the importance of watching and waiting. And recognizing and accepting that we have no idea what we're doing. Every day, Mordechai would pass by the harem. To know whether she was okay, Esther, and what might happen to her. He had no solutions. And even when she became queen, what he says to her is, look, you've got a great opportunity here to maybe do something effective. But I mean, I have no idea if this is the reason you became queen. I just think that you have a great opportunity over here. Maybe we should take advantage of it. It's presented itself. Everything is kulehai ve'ulai in the Megillah. Everything is maybe we'll do this, then it'll happen. There's only one thing that is certain in the Megillah, and that is that the Jewish people will survive somehow or another. That Mordechai has no question about it. Right? That's going to happen. But how it happens, the casualties that will happen as a result of it, and so on and so forth, that's completely open. We have no idea. So there's only one thing right now that is left for us to do. Again, in my humble opinion, which you can toss. I mean, you're in my room, so I'm giving you my opinion. You can know something else, but this is what I'm suggesting. And that is that we have to love the Aretz. in the sense that we recognize that there really is nowhere else for us to live. And if we are living somewhere else, it's because logistically that is where it is that we might be currently working. So we're working abroad. But to question where it is that we belong as human beings on this earth is only there. That's the whole darn story, literally, from beginning to end. It's the whole story. It is the core of the entire, everything else is simply layered on top of it. And we lose that. But it doesn't mean that we can do whatever it is that we want on that land. There's a landlord. And we have to play with how it is that things go. It's one of the reasons why people got so upset at Chacham Ovadia Yosef, because he had a psak. He was posek that if giving back land will bring peace, then we give back land. The argument was it's not going to bring peace. So maybe it's not worth giving back the land. But he said if it were true that giving back land would bring peace, you give back the land. Why? We want to be able to live in peace on the land that we've got. So we don't have all of it? Okay, good. There was plenty of times in history where HaKadosh Baruch Hu just didn't give us all the land. As a matter of fact, the whole way of dealing with the iniquities of the people was to remove land from sovereignty. And we assume, just wait a minute, we should have all of it. Miyamar. You know, interestingly, there are there are 3 places in Eretz Yisrael that we acquired with an active action of acquisition. And interestingly, those 3 places are the place of the worst difficulties for us. Shechem, Yaakov Avinu says, I took it with my bow, my sword. Go live in Shechem. You know, good luck. Harabait, David HaMelech bought Harabait for the sake of building the Midrash. Good luck. And Hebron, Abraham Avinu bought Me'arat HaMachpelah. You think that it's a fluke that these places are so difficult for us to be able to manifest and live in and manifest ourselves in? I don't think it's fluke. We assume that everything should just push, fight. It's not how it works. So what there is there are processes. And we are not the ones who determine the process. But we can certainly be alert and aware and awake to the process. And that is the difficulty, because it requires a certain faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he's going to bring the Brit back, bring the Brit through to where it is that it needs to be. And the more that we get lost in the religion and the politics and the social issues and so on and so forth, the more we lose that basic call of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that emerges from the earth itself. That's why it says, Emet me'eret tzmach. Truth radiates up from the earth itself. And until we end up having that kind of connection, relationship to it, as a whole people, I'm not saying nobody does. Chas v'shalom, I'm not saying nobody does. They're wonderful, wonderful people. They actually do. But as a nation, until we get there, if we get there, it will not be. And so Yom HaAtzmaut is a wonderful, wonderful day to celebrate. But it is not the end by any means. And we have to be very careful about celebrating it as though it is the end. Because if we do, we're only getting stuck in the local, religious, political issues. And we are expecting, as it were, the fat lady singing before it is time for her to come on. So what do? We do what the Hachamim did. You know what the Hachamim did in the Aretz? So beautiful. Have a look. There's a pasuk in Tehillim. Right? One of the things that is praised to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, saying, we love the Aretz so much that your servants, your Abadim, desired its very rocks, the stones of the very earth itself. And the dust they adore. So the Gemara expounds on that. It says it tells us about how some of the Hachamim acted in the land. It says Rabbi Abba minashek kifei de Akko. Rabbi Akiva would kiss the rocks in Akko to show his love for the land. Rabbi Hanina mitakeh mitkle. Rabbi Hanina would go around and fix the roads. If there were potholes and things, he'd fill them himself. He didn't wait for the city to do it. He did it. Why? He loved the land. He wanted to fix it. The Hachamim in general, if it would get too hot, sitting outside, they would go sit in the shade. And if it would get too cold, they would go and sit in the sun if they could. Why? That nobody should be in a situation that they said anything bad about the weather in Eretz Yisrael. They went to that degree. Rabbi Haya bar Gamda migander be'afra. Rabbi Haya bar Gamda, he would roll in the dust, in the dirt of Israel. This is showing physical affection to the land itself, regardless of the politics. And all of that, so Harambam says, the other things that I bring you are more of the praise of the Aretz, right? How it says, Eretz asher Adonai Elohecha doresh ota, the land that the Lord your God constantly looks after. Hamid, constantly. The eyes of the Lord your God are upon it from the beginning to the end of the year. That's a pretty powerful thing to say. God's watching that land so much. I mean, talk about a landlord. You get people to take care of your properties. This one he personally takes care of. So why is this so important? Because ultimately, why is land for human beings so important? Because as human beings, we need home. If we are going to be everything that we are meant to be, then we need to be able to have a place in which we can actually grow and be that. In peace, in sovereignty, in independence. That's what home is. And right now, at home, we have to sleep with one eye open. Nobody's relaxed. No matter how high the walls we build, no matter how strong our army, no matter what the case may be, thank God we can protect. But that's not home. In other words, it's not being at home. Sure, we feel that when we go there, if we have any sensitivity, because you feel that you are more free there than you are anywhere else in the world, thank God. I told you I tell you, when did I still tell somebody, the dialogue between Herman Wouk and Ben Gurion. Yeah, you know that. Ben Gurion hosted Herman Wouk. Herman Wouk was a very famous playwright, author, wrote screenplays, very, very famous, very famous. He died at 101. He lived in Palm Springs. He was from, he did Dafioni. He wrote a book called This Is My God, which I highly recommend everybody to read. It's an excellent book on Judaism. So he tells a story, not in This Is My God, he wrote another book called The Will to Live On, which is another development, all right? He tells a story that he was visiting Ben Gurion in the early days, in the 60s. And he was already old, and he says, Ben Gurion's on a kibbutz. And before Herman Wouk is leaving, he says to him, Herman, you must move here. You must come and live here. You'll be free. Herman Wouk says to him, free? Look at how you have to live. Just constant fighting, incursions, terrorism, like this craziness that you have to deal with over here. He said, I didn't say safe. I said free. That's a different issue. Being at home, you can be who you are. And that we do have to a certain degree. Except that, if you're religious, nobody likes you. And if you're Biloni, nobody likes you. But otherwise, you can be who you are. And ultimately, what we want is to be able to be safe at home. But we're not. We have a certain level of freedom, but we don't have safety. And part of the beracha in the Torah is that you should be able to be there and be completely secure. Mishavtem betach, it says. What's betach? You will sit securely. That will be, when that is the case, you will know that you are home and that I have fulfilled my promise. So Harambam says, why do we want the days of the Mashiach? Not for the Mashiach. We want the days of the Mashiach so we can be home in safety and security and freedom. Says Harambam. You want to know why they wanted the Mashiach so badly? Not because we wanted to have control of the rest of the world. Not to become a world power. Not because we wanted to take any kind of subjugations against other nations. We just we didn't want anybody to raise us up and say, oh, how great Israel is. Right? None of that. None of that. We have no interest of empire or any of that. Nor do we want to just sit and drink all the time. Rather, that we should be able to study our Torah and to live our lives within the framework of our breed in freedom and wholeness and be everything that we can be. There's no taskmaster, there's nobody standing over us, no oppressor. That's why. We want to have home and be able to live freely there in our fullest sense. So, all I'm saying is that there needs to be a balancing in our awareness, if we are taking it seriously, about how it is that we deal with Yom HaAtzmaut, and for that matter, the manifestation of the state of Israel. Yom HaAtzmaut is absolutely a day to celebrate, and I encourage everybody to do so. Whether we should say a full Hallel on the night of with a bracha on Yom HaAtzmaut, I don't know. I don't know any other model for that anywhere else, except for Pesach, which is a whole other thing. Not this. We have to temper it and recognize that it is a point along a path. It is a significant milestone, significant, miraculous, unbelievable milestone along a path that still must continue. So I liken it to this episode in Ezra. This episode in Ezra, I put you, is a story about the second Bet HaMikdash when it was built and its inauguration. And it's a fascinating story because it says the inauguration of Bet HaMikdash, you could imagine, was going to be it's a huge party, right? It's a huge celebration. And of course, it was a huge celebration. Except that it's important to remember that the second Bet HaMikdash was built only 70 years after the first Bet HaMikdash, which means that the older people who watched the second Bet HaMikdash built were kids when the first Bet HaMikdash was standing. So they remembered it. And what was their reaction to the building of the second Bet HaMikdash, which is a huge redemptive moment? You can imagine, right? ובשנה השנית לבואם אל בית האלוהים לירושלים בחודש השני החלו זרובבל בן שלתיאל וישוע בן יהוצדק ושאר החיים הכהנים הלוויים וכל הבאים משבי ירושלים, all of the Kohanim and the people who came back to Yerushalayim from Babel were all gathering into Jerusalem. ויעמידו את הלוויים מבין 20 שנה ואמר לנצח על מלאכת בית אדוני, and all of the Leviim who were older than 20 years old were established on staff to be able to serve in the Mikdash appropriately. ויעמוד יהושע בנה ואחד קדמיאל בנה בני יהודה כאחד לנצח על עושי המלאכה בבית האלוהים בני חנדד בניהם ואחיהם הלוויים, and all the work was being overseen by these families of the Leviim. ויסדו הבונים את היכל אדוני, and they set down finally the foundation of the Hechal, of the Bet HaMikdash, and it was now ready for inauguration. Everything was finally complete. ויעמידו הכהנים מלובשים מחסות, and they were specially dressed Kohanim playing on the trumpets. והלוויים בני אסף מסלתיים, and there were cymbals being as part of the orchestra by the Leviim. להלל את אדוני על ידי דוד מלך ישראל, to praise God by David, king of Israel. Why by David, king of Israel? Tehillim. The Tehilot of David ben Yishai. Kolu Tehilot David ben Yishai. And this is what they're praying. ויענו בהלל ובהודות לאדוני כי טוב כי לעולם חסדו. They're saying, הודו להשם כי טוב כי לעולם חסדו. That's what they're doing, right? וכל העם הריעו תרועה גדולה. And the whole nation is blasting on the shofarot, and they're chanting and cheering. Behalel Adonai, praising God al Husad Bet Adonai, that the house of God has once again been established. I mean, this is the rebuilding of the Bet HaMikdash. ורבים מהכהנים והלוויים וראשי האבות הזקנים, but there were many of the Kohanim, the Levim, the heads of the households who were old, Ashirahu et Habayit HaRishon, that had seen the first Bet Midrash, Biyosdo, in its full establishment, Zeh Habayit B'Arneihem, and then they saw this house, right, this Bet Midrash, Bochim B'Kol Gadol, they were crying loudly, lamenting. It was like Shabbat for them. And on the other side, there was a lot of people cheering. So you had cheers and cries. And it was so loud, they couldn't tell the difference between the happiness and the crying because both were so loud and they were clashing. Why are they crying at the building? Cry before the building. They cry the building because, okay, now we're building it. We built it, it's still not great. And the point of this is, right, that there was in this great happiness that everybody was getting very, very caught up in and excited about, which is entirely understandable, there was a temper. There was a tempering of it, recognizing that there's stuff missing here. And Hachamim say what was missing was no Shekhinah in this building. And when you've seen a house with a Shekhinah as opposed to a house without Shekhinah, it's something left to be desired. And so we see a beauty in Eretz Yisrael. There's no question about it. And a beauty in the Medina itself. There's no question about it. But there are things that are missing. And we must not forget the things that we're missing. We afraid sometimes that if we recognize things that are missing, we diminish in what's actually there. But that's not true. We have to celebrate what's there and also recognize what's missing. And that's what I think is important to recognize. I'm going to close reading you this bit from my friend Mark Helprin, who's one of my favorite authors and a good friend and one of the wisest people I know. And he writes this, by the way, is a great book. It's one of my favorites. I haven't read it in a long time, but it's by Alan Dershowitz. It's a collection of essays by a whole array of Jewish people about what Israel means to them. I love this book because it's just the nation. It's like every color of the nation, every different kind of nation, talking about what the land means to them, right? What the place means to them. I've read it many times, brought to tears. Natalie Portman and, people like that all over, right? So this is Mark Helprin. Mark Helprin writes, long after I first came to Israel as a volunteer in June of 1967, when I was 20, I actually observed day by day, what it is in particular that allows Israel to be more than just a Jewish Singapore. That June was the most buoyant month of my life. And when victory was unquestioned, Jerusalem was of gold. This after the 67 war, obviously. Israel had no gravity, and neither did I. In the back of an Air Force truck that had stopped at Sde Boker, I took a bag of peaches from an aged Ben Gurion who, tzaddik-like, without a word, blessed the boys who were taking care of the planes. The dominant form of transport seemed to be the motorcycle with sidecar. There was no Coca-Cola, no Black September, no Intifada. The selfless concentration of the founders existed simultaneously with the relief and relaxation of victory. For one giddy moment, the effects of achievement did not undermine the benefits of aspiration. And then, inevitably, they did. But even as history reasserted itself and times grew, if not more difficult and less heroic, the passion that seems to flow up from the land of Israel in great and invisible waves did not subside. Of course, it never does, no matter what the difficulties. Some claim to see it in the quality of the light, or feel in the quality of the air, or sense in the quality of the silence of Jerusalem and elsewhere, at the tops of mountains, in the Machtesh Ramon, on the beaches of the Mediterranean, an indication of this passion, a special and at times even an unnerving intensity. This is quite so, and it is not merely a geological effect, or the remnant spell of history. It is the turbulence of earthly things in the presence of God. Embrace this turbulence, for it is the wellspring of action and the heart of the nation. All else, every secular dream, image, and effort, every religious practice and definition, every monumental thing like war or nation building, is merely its faint echo. I leave you with that. And I wish you a very happy Yom HaAtzmaut. And Yehira Son, we should be zocher to the Sikkim that we read. We should come back to the Aretz in peace and teshuvah and wholeness. In Rabbi Amen. You want to show that?